good afternoon. It's afternoon here in Maryland. It is July 4th, uh, 2025. Um, and it has been, this is Living in the Promised Land, an immigrant rights podcast. I'm Mark Shmueli, your host. And before we start, I want to thank Jeff Barsky and Sect Factory for the intro music and Stephanie Buatois for producing uh, this and every other show. And it's been quite a week. It's been quite a week, quite 2 weeks. Every day is something. And as I said from the beginning, we could do 24-hour streaming and still not be up to date on all the things in immigration. So that's always my caveat, always my apology. I would have to have a team and work full time in order to really bring everybody up to date. Because frankly, I can't stay up to date and do my own work and live my own life on everything. But we will touch on the different things that have happened this week. And this week, one of the things that was centered was the state of Florida, um, a state that I love, a state that I went to college in, a state that my dad went to college in, a state that my grandparents moved to in the early 1950s after, um, you know, fleeing Europe, fleeing what was then, Palestine and Eastern Europe, and uh, my grandmother losing her two older brothers in the Russian army and in the Soviet army and in the Holocaust. And so I grew up in that shadow. I was very close with my grandmother, and she loved the respite of being in Miami Beach. And she wanted to be there her whole life. They went back and forth. She wanted to be there, and it's a dear place to me. It's an amazing state, and it's been run by pretty much, fascist is overused, but authoritarian, you know, people that are not only horrible for the environment and everything else in Florida, but really they've changed the mood of Florida. I remember when Jeb Bush, I was in the Young Democrats in Florida, and Jeb Bush was in the College Democrats, and Jeb Bush was pushing the age of the young Republicans when I was there. And Jeb, was a Republican classic. And when he ran for governor, he had this really beautiful ad that had um, many flags, one Florida, and there were flags from all over the world. And Jeb Bush learned Spanish and married a woman from Mexico. Jeb Bush never denigrated immigrants, and really, before 9/11, especially, did his brother. And I think that this is, one of the changes we've seen as we've gone from Jeb Bush to Rick Scott to the current governor, who comes from the hometown of our guest, Haia Abdel Jaber. Haia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Haia is, I would say, an immigration lawyer. She's more than that. She's an immigration lawyer, a family lawyer, and probably most importantly, a University of Florida sports fan. That's what. So that's probably the most important for me. No, seriously, Haia's got a lot to. We're gonna.
Gators.
Yeah, go Gators. Yeah, I was gonna say, we have I'm a huge baseball fan, and this is probably obscure for people, but the center fielder for the Washington Nationals is a guy named Jacob Young, who was the center fielder for Florida. And he's not much of a hitter, but he is a Gold Glove finalist, amazing, and he made a catch. I implore people to turn off all the news and stuff for a while and just watch his catch from the other day, where he went over, climbed the wall. The Spider-Man catch is amazing. And I just think, wow, he's a really sweet guy. So yeah, I care deeply about Florida, and I care deeply about what happened with New College of the University of South Florida, and what DeSantis has done to destroy a state in which people really did, as an immigrant, you could move there safely. It was a place that was diverse. Coming from a suburb in Massachusetts, the fact that I could go to a college and meet people from places like Guyana and Suriname, and lots of people from, Puerto Rico, and of course Cubans, and other parts of the world too. Now Florida has like a South Asian center, and it's just And I know it's risen in the ranks, and it has not risen in the ranks for any other reason than it's seen as a world educational destination. And I know my doctor, who was Ethiopian, my doctor of about, 8 years ago was Ethiopian, went there to do his residency and loved the town. It's just a beautiful town. Um, and Jacksonville has become a very cool place too. There's galleries and things I've heard. And it's just, I mean, I could talk all day about Florida, but I can also say, wow, what's happened there? What has happened to Florida? And so, we have seen with this new jail in the Everglades that they put this, name to that's, cheesy and kind of stupid because anybody who knows about alligators knows that you can walk right up on one. I wouldn't pet one, but they're not lions, they're not tigers, they're just sitting there for the most part. But also it's just in a place that's Florida. And what's bad about it is that it's like heavily concentrated and all this other things of people and it's inhumane. And that's what has become of Florida. So uh how are things down there this week? With
This
all these
week.
things happening? This
So
week
this week, yes, we just opened Alligator Alcatraz.
is what they call
Trump
it.
was down here touring it, and I mean, I think it's like 50 miles from his Miami resort. You know, it's in the
Uh,
marsh.
Mar-a-Lago's in Palm Beach. It's right near where my parents used to live. It's right next to the Seminole Reservation, which is great. They have a great museum, good cafe. It's interesting. You want to do the airboats and things like that. That's there, but it's their reservation, and the Miccosukee Reservation is not far, and it's nowhere near as remote as other places. So yeah, it's not far if in inland, but yeah.
They're already, talking about opening up a second one closer to Gainesville, between Gainesville and St. Augustine. So, you know, um, uh, there, that place in the reservation now is going to have also a merchandise store for Alligator Alcatraz. So you never know, we can start tours.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's yeah, and I do wonder, I mean, this is something that like a lot of things he's doing, I don't know how popular it is. I mean, I think in Florida you have this skewed view. But maybe not. I mean, it's hard because I think it's confusing to people. So, just to sort of unpack that part, and again, there was a everybody knows there was a big piece of legislation, a big law that passed yesterday. It did lots of things all over, and we're going to touch on a lot today, but we're not going to cover it fully because things need to develop. There's going to be lawsuits on there. There's a lot of things where they're making immigration applications way more expensive for people. They're fining, all of these kind of harsh things. A lot of them might be tied up in courts, and um, you know, eh, it's the I think it's the strategy of flooding, um, of flooding the news, flooding, uh, you know, blowing our minds, literally, like blowing our minds, not in a way like something's amazing, but blowing them in that we can't both absorb and analyze what's going on. And in this podcast, we know that. And we are not going to do that to you. We're not going to race through every single, provision right now. And people can look at it or not. But what we want is for people to understand what their goal is and where this is going. And I believe, and I I'll ask you this, Haia, is I believe that most people are not them. I
Oh
mean,
yeah. No, people on the ground are not happy about this place. This place is going to cost $450 million a year, and Florida is footing the bill. We are upfronting the bill and then, probably going to
oh,
submit the receipts to the federal government later. But that's what Ron DeSantis said. We are footing the bill, Floridians. So we are not happy about this. And maybe that's why they're making it such a PR opportunity, with the front pages and here's the merchandise and alligator Alcatraz and making it like, like it's a thing, like it's somehow a theme park, but they're trying to raise money.
Right. And look, we know one thing, people that term is out there, and yeah, I mean, look, it's good. I mean, it's smart. One thing that I will always bow my head to on Donald Trump, and we need to realize it, and we need to understand that you know, you don't get to be president with that lack of background, skills, knowledge. Um, you can
Without the
fool
PR and
people.
the marketing.
Yeah. I mean, you can bankrupt places, you cannot pay people, you can do those things and get away with it, but there's a finite thing. But to win elections against $1 billion last year, it's because you brand well and you understand how to get out there and you understand how to reach people. And more than just the people that really like you, but you know how to do a message. And so they are, they got some alliteration, they got this message out there, and touche in that sense. I mean, touche against, what we see as, and we talk about this, the run to be bipartisan, the run to take the view that you too can be harsh, meaning the Democrats in power. Like the alternative message that people hear in the media. And if the alternative message is, yeah, we need to do this, but not so mean, it doesn't it looks weak. And it's kind of like, if if your kid does something illegal and you say, well, yeah, he should be turned in, but let me talk to them first and everything, rather than say, you know what, you did the thing, you take the harsh punishment, and then you define it that way. And this is where you know uh the the Democrat, the timidity or the indifference, the indifference is out there. And so you know I think this is something that is 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 gonna have to have people standing up and saying, yeah, no, this is
Yeah.
what immigrants are, and this is what immigration is. And this is where the cruelty comes. And I think 2018, when people saw kids in cages and they saw, you know, kids crying, and that hit mainstream because the networks were there. Now, whether it hits mainstream or not, I don't, maybe just old people that watch network news, like really old people, but like most people on TikTok seeing these videos of, the ICE grabbing people off the street, dividing families outside of a courtroom, people who go to court, people who are with their lawyers, people who
And
clearly are
people with
not.
status, Mark,
Right.
people
People
with
with status.
status.
But even so, you're with your lawyer going to an immigration court. How are you somebody who's running away from the law? Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but they've been able to move the goalposts, and we can complain all we want and say, oh, no, they're wrong and all these things, but they are controlling the ball, as they say, right? They've got time of possession. And this is,
But like you said earlier, they're using these laws that we didn't, were never used before, right?
like, oh, yeah. I mean, have you seen that yourself? Like where they've used a law that hasn't been used
Okay, so
until then?
yeah, I mean, the enemy law from whatever, the 1700s,
The
right?
enemy
That
aliens.
they
The enemy
picked up
aliens.
the new
Hmm.
guy for, right? But we've seen it actually since the Biden administration that there's these laws that are specifically toward more Middle Eastern and specifically towards Palestine and the Gaza region. We've seen these laws used towards people, against people like that. We've never seen it as crazy as Trump has used it broadly for expedited removal and all of this stuff. But they're using laws that were already on the books, right? So for an example, we had Gazan clients who entered through the southern border back in 2023 when Biden was in power. And instead of letting them go and having ICE detain them so that they could go through their immigration process because they presented a FI or a fear, the the government, what they did was they put them in federal prison for a maximum of 6 months for a misdemeanor that usually anybody else would get off of for 1 day or a $500 fine. But
And
they were
what was
all
that?
jailed.
What was the misdemeanor?
It's a USC 1325 improper entry. So it's a first time offense, it's a misdemeanor, and usually no one is convicted on this law. But for some reason, these Gazan clients, all the adults, so there was six of them that entered together, but all the adults, the four adults, got each a max of 6 months in jail for it, which is the max.
So what does it mean entered? Oh, like how did they enter?
Entered through the southern border without inspection.
Okay.
So what we call iwi in
Yes,
immigration.
yeah, in the world, yeah, we call that iwi. But yeah, they came through Mexico. They were like, and so one of the things is that people have this misconception, or I mean, not a misconception, the conception that is put out in the media. And remember, your news anchors and everybody else, they're not going to know this stuff. And frankly, they shouldn't, because where do you learn it? Even lawyers, like law school. My law school had, now they have something, but they had no immigration class. I went to Texas and did a case in law school and came back, as a pro bono during my second year of law school in spring break. And I came back and taught a course. I taught one of the sessions in my course because my professor was not a specialist. So very little, and in general knowledge, people don't have it. And there's very few immigration lawyers compared to other lawyers, and it's really complex. So, don't ever, the purpose here is to give you, enough so that you can ask questions. And because what you're learning, even in the media, they're getting better, but man, the learning curve is tough. So when they talk about and show the pictures of the Mexican border, they're always showing Latinos. But you know, to get it,
No,
there were
there's all kinds of Indians and
Mhm.
Middle
Oh, yeah.
Easterners and
Right,
yeah.
because you just can't come here on a visa, and that's the thing. So they come in, a country in Central America will allow them to come in, and they come through. So, this law is a law that was never prosecuted, but it was part of that 96 law we talk about. Just think 97-3 is how it passed the Senate, and people say, how could they do something this inhumane? Well, Japanese internment had a 93% approval rating. So, this is what happens when people um, don't really look at it and they accept the government's definition of fear. And in that case, it was bipartisan and it was everybody. And, in the House on that one, our hero Chuck Schumer was one of the ones conceding harsher and harsher penalties. And this big law, big comprehensive law, was made it a crime to cross the border, and the first time illegally, and without any
Inspection.
inspection, which is how everybody came through for years. And so they never prosecuted it. But Trump first started doing it the first time around, and yeah, it was cruel, but it was there. So you set the table for somebody, and it's you don't expect them to eat. And so in this case,
That's how they started the family separation, where they would take the child to the immigration detention, and then the father or mother would serve the prison time, the federal prison time, 6 months.
right,
So
right, and the kids
use
can't
that
go.
law.
I mean, minors can't go to detention, so they put them in like immigration. They're under like Health and Human Services, and God, now well, and you have to have all your. The funny thing there is, yeah, they make sure you have all your vaccines and all, so before you get released out. And now that it's controlled by
Kennedy.
Kennedy, yes, by Bobby Jr. It might be, who knows? Who knows what they're going to get in education? It's like, ooh, they might be serving them brainworms. So who knows what's going on? But these are crazy times. But yeah, all of the like, there was such a regime of detention that it was really the goal for detention was that people would be there detained, but that they would get out, and that they would be able to fight their cases if they had that. And now they're trying to keep them detained or deported on anything they can use. And you give them anything they can use, and they did. But in your case, our friend and immigrant rights champion, Joe Biden, use this. So what would make Joe Biden use something that was never used before and seen as sort of a non-touchable, meaning actually jail people for crossing the border, which really wouldn't make sense to your average person because they know that people are coming across the border, mostly, non-threatening, etc. So what is that, Haya? What
So
made this?
yeah, like I mean, he used it against my client specifically because we believe because they were from Gaza, you know, they were instantly, just because where they're from, labeled a national security threat, and in the end, there was nothing from the government that they presented during the hearings that ever made them a national security threat, so they were able to be released from detention. But yeah, it was post October 7, 2023, obviously they had entered post that. So the United States was and still is all for, Israel and anything that is Palestinian or pro-Palestinian or even from that region is going to be immediately looked at as a threat.
So uh, yeah, and so in is so were they charged? When you're in immigration court, the government says you're from a certain country and you're not from the United States, and then they say if you're deported, you have to go back to that country. So, did they? So the government said they were from Palestine?
Oh no, the government would never admit to a Palestinian state on their paperwork. So the notice to appear, what we call in immigration the NTA, given by ICE and DHS, said that they were natives of Israel and citizens of Israel. So
This is the charging document for folks out there. This is the charging document. It's like the arrest warrant, like you committed this crime, and so yeah, and so they said they were from Israel. Interesting, and
we had to fight for that, Mark. We had to fight for that to be removed to place the word stateless for them.
wow, wow, and so it just as an aside here for folks, and this is part of the whole craziness of you know, we need to know what's going on. You need to have ammunition. So when your uncle turns around and says, yeah, they don't use Palestine because whatever they heard on, Breitbart or from Steve Bannon or whoever, well, I mean, Steve Bannon might not be the worst, but whoever they heard from some source that's, unchecked and inaccurate. The United States, I mean, it's a little different under Trump now, but the United States does not recognize the Israeli occupation of does not recognize as legal under international law the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. And so that's
Or
that yeah.
Gaza.
Well, yeah, I mean Gaza, yeah, they don't view it as an occupation, I believe. That's not so Gaza's considered, that's its own separate kind of thing, but the West Bank is legally an occupation and Israel says they can control it, but then the United States actually under this same Biden administration, which won't recognize it, sent Justice Department lawyers to the International Court of Justice to continue this longstanding case to have a finding that the occupation is illegal and that they are still not following the UN by uh, leaving a place they shouldn't occupy. So this is the thing, and I think people are realizing that, and people are realizing that in the United States, and people are um, breaking down the barriers that cause uh this prejudice because look, in the United States we can have different views and we can have different, you have people. One of the things, that this leads me to be thinking is that there are people from all over the world that come from, you have people that come from monarchies. I mean, Reza Pahlavi's, son, the last Shah, his son lives in they call him the Shah of Maryland, and he lives in Potomac, Maryland, 20 minutes from me, and they call it, the Shah of Maryland, who's, in Paris thinking he's going to walk in and become the new, Shah of Iran. And and then you have his followers, okay, wanting monarchy. Then you have people coming from, countries where they are some of the greatest labor and rights movements in the United States have come from people that fought for these rights in their own country and got asylum, or maybe they came here and they come, and they have fought for workers' rights because they believe in that. They didn't have that justice where they were, but they fought for it hard. And so you have that, and you have all kinds of different immigrants that come from different points of views. And, and so I think this is the beautiful part of the United States. And so I'm not going to end. We can talk about other things, but I want to take a little break here from this to talk about something that was a very amazing thing, and that the largest city in the United States elected a African-born, Ugandan-born, South African-raised Shia Muslim from whose family is from India, whose mom did a movie that was very influential to me when I was in college, Mississippi Masala, which taught me so much about both the South, Indian, Ugandan, that and The Last King of Scotland. If you ever see it's a holiday weekend. I don't know where they're streaming. I was gonna look that up, but you can look. Those are two movies that will really open your eyes to seeing, Indian culture and what South Asians went through in Uganda in their own ethnic cleansing from that Idi Amin did there. Idi Amin, a dictator that the British installed when they left, causing massive human rights violations, which were then blamed on them not being a civilized country, but it was again done by, England. The people of Uganda would not have chosen him when they got independence. Um, and so he was elected mayor of New York. The, and so and he also had some interesting views on Israel. So what do you think? How does that affect immigration? How does that affect us culturally? And you
Yeah,
know,
so Trump touted that he was going to take his citizenship away, right? Zohran Mamdani, even Elon Musk, anyone who's just remotely vocal against him, he's just going to take their citizenship away. How do you take somebody's citizenship away? That's a really tough process to denaturalize someone. But he's touting that, and always because, his views are not the views that anyone who is Republican, and even the most of the Democrats, the ones that call themselves progressive, are not for. They are not for his views at all, and his views are not drastic. But like he said, he was like you said, actually, he was raised in South Africa post apartheid, so he has a different view of what's going on in the West Bank, what's going on in Israel, the occupation. He has a different view, which is probably the view of most of the world, excluding the UK and the US. This is the view of the most of the world and the International Criminal Court and the UN, that this occupation is illegal. Even Biden, when he was in, segue back to what you said in the Biden era, you know, it's a little different now with Trump, but when Biden was president, there was some horrific attacks by settlers, the illegal settlers in the West Bank, coming down to the villages. And he went and he labeled some of those settlers as terrorists. And Trump comes into power and removes that label and, basically pardons them and weaponizes the settlers to do more attacks on the West Bank villages, which is happening right now, as we speak. So Zohran Mamdani just vocalized that. He said, I don't see, they asked him if Israel has a right to exist, and he said yes, as a democratic state, as a state with equal rights for everyone. And that's what they didn't like. That's what made him, suddenly a pariah to all the, I mean, he doesn't have any endorsees to everybody who's in power, really.
right, right. I mean, his only endorsee from the Senate is the highly anti-Semitic, children of Holocaust victims, and Bernie Sanders, who people are. I call them like, we Jews can't excommunicate, but damn, they just say we're marginalized, what have you. So yeah, and I think that yeah, I mean, that's
Self-hating Jew, Mark. That's
right,
what you are.
self-hating to what have you, and but it's what's interesting about it as we look at you know the way that it's viewed in the United States and the way that it's sort of um I take it at this. at the I always remember, like, when did it hit me? You know, things on, because, and I've talked about in other episodes, and I've talked about in other, shows that I've been on, and where I've talked about me personally, my journey as somebody whose grandfather trained Golda Meir on a kibbutz, and my family's been there since 1920, and all of the ramifications and how I see it. And it's very close to different, people who took over, quote, settlers in the west of the United States, or how I'm, but what hit me was I was watching the Olympics with my mom, and you remember they were delayed during COVID. So I think they were in 21, and then they didn't have fans. But the Olympics, I think they were in Japan, and the Summer Olympics. And I was watching, and there was an Israeli gymnast who won a silver medal. And just they were just saying, oh, and there's his fiance. They can't get married in Israel because she's not Jewish. And their children can't be Israeli. And that's my situation. Whereas my friends, because it's recognized from the mother, because it's Orthodox Jewish law. And, you know, you know, that's just that's discriminate, and we know that, right now we've seen it in this sort of discrimination within the society itself. And the fact that it was NBC News Olympics, which is certainly not, last I checked, they weren't partnered with Al Jazeera in presenting the Olympics. And the fact that it was so natural for them to say it, and there's these doubts, and that there's so many Jews that voted for Zohran makes, and these movements, and I've talked about it before. I know anti-Semitism. I grew up around it to some degree. And I was, the names were there, and I saw that, and I knew the tropes, and my dad talked to me a lot about it. And so it was like, I get it. And never, never was it from anybody really from the Southern Hemisphere, except for people who hadn't seen Jews, like why, places where there weren't many. But clearly the people running the show right now are masterclass anti-Semites. I don't say Trump's brilliant on a lot of things, great brander. He's got those anti-Semitic tropes down perfectly. When he tells those Jewish businessmen raising money for him, hey, come on, I know you guys are tight, but you got to give me some money because I'm giving this to you and you're giving it
Yes,
to me. Like the
yes,
fact that he
right.
views us as
Yeah,
transactional, that's it. That's it. That's it. Nothing more. Like,
yeah.
and I think this is part of the problem in a different context, but this is part of the problem with he doesn't have this affinity that like Biden did, this like he doesn't get strewn by the propaganda. He gets strewn by, you scratch my hand, I'll scratch yours. And that's it. And so there's that and the other things that it's kind of like in the people don't know this, but the Secretary of State of the Trader Confederacy, them, he's the only one of the whole Confederacy that got out. All the rest of them got arrested. He got out to France, and he was the first to be blamed because he's the Jew. He's a traitor. So all of these kinds of things, like in those days, yes, and we know through times when Jews have been scapegoated and what led to the Holocaust. These are the same people in our history that support Trump that would have, we had a very strong Nazi party in the 30s. We had a very strong right wing that did not believe that Hitler was ideologically wrong to at least blame Jews. And so that is the true anti-Semitism, and it's the same thing. It's the same root that creates anti-Islamophobia. It's the same root that creates the immigrant hate, and and that's you make this connection of and it's pretty crazy because the alliance now in the United States on these Congress people are Mike Johnson and Chuck Schumer are closer on the rules to punish on the anti-Semitism means criticizing Israel means criticizing Jews, and people should be punished.
Dangerous conflation there, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
criticizing Israel, criticizing the government, criticizing what's going on means anti-Semitic. So anti-Israel means anti-Semitic. That is, that's the dangerousness of it. And that's why they're labeling, Zohran Mamdani as anti-Semitic when he's Totally not. I mean, like you said, his voters were Jewish, you know, his
I mean,
running,
the guy grew up in New York and went to Bronx. So
yeah,
you don't just do that. You just don't be anti-Semitic in New York like that. You just don't make it. Not in the era his parents made it there. You just don't do that. And so but again, we're in this transition, but we're in this transition. I think that people don't understand, like, also the appeal of somebody beyond getting beyond that. He also got in the face of Tom Homan, Tom Homan is the man who was we have kind of three people running immigration, really. We have Christy Nome, who's sort of the people call her
the
what I
Barbie.
Barbie Ice. Yeah, I mean she's the governor of South Dakota with tremendous experience in immigration, who's like just for photo ops more like that, and she's got the Western look, or whatever that look, and she's got she's good on TV. And then you've got Stephen Miller, who's who pulls out all these old laws, and he's sharp at doing that. That's his day, pulling out these old laws and strategies and all that. And then you have Tom Holman, who's like the guy who's been in the agency forever. He's the crusty guy who's sick of being like, criticized all these years, and now he's completely empowered and talented. And you've got him and Zohran got in his face in something. So, and he said, no, New York won't cooperate. Uh, so what does that mean when a city's cooperating?
What do you mean New York won't cooperate?
Well, they won't cooperate. Like they're not going to use their police. They're not going to assist ICE.
Oh,
This the thing that's coming up right now. Like Trump is
yeah,
threatening.
which is complete opposite of Florida, because we have deputized our, law enforcement to do ICE duties. You know, we have allowed them to come into our schools. So I mean, and this is the state's right? So New York won't cooperate because they want to save their communities and they want to band together, and that's what we should do, you know. And there are some schools, I think in Orlando, that have sent out some policy to their teachers about what to do when ICE shows up, just because it has been happening here. You know, it has been happening in the schools. I don't know about New York or Maryland, but the schools here, they would show up to question a student about immigration status or anything like that, mostly to scare the student and have the principal or someone at the school, the administration office, just to call the parents and say, hey, ICE is here talking to your student. If you want to come down, and you can come down and be present. They're not there for the student. They're there just to detain the parents. So I'm telling my clients, you get calls like that, let me know. Don't go down to the school. They're not going to do anything to your child. They're waiting for you to come down there so they can pick you up all together. But yeah, why would New York want to cooperate with something like that?
Well, and this has been going on. The program is called 287G. I did, back in the late aughts, early tens. I don't know, is that how you say it? So I was on, the governor of Maryland's commission to study the impact of immigrants. This was Governor Martin O'Malley, who was just in the Biden administration as a Social Security chief, and he ran for president against Clinton and Obama in that election. Oh no, it was 2016. It was when Obama, at the end of Obama. It was Clinton and John Edwards, I think was. I don't.
John Kerry?
No, it was 2016. So it was Hillary, Bernie, and him. It was Bernie. It was Bernie, Hillary, and him were like the last three standing. And so he was around, but he didn't go. But he was very good on protecting immigrants in the sense of, like, and this is the thing, like, he was a mainstream Democrat on most things, but when it came to ICE was putting a detention center uh, of some sort, and not a center in Western Maryland, and there wasn't. The locals were. Oh no, it was it might have been a kid, a minor from minors. It was some immigration facility that wasn't horrible. Like they were serving people at it. And so the locals were complaining about having immigrant. They were really complaining about it, and it was actually something to serve, as I recall. And he said, look, you don't deserve these people. I'm not having them go there. I'm going to put them somewhere where it's friendly. Like, basically, screw you. You're not going to be listened to, rather than, you know, the Kirsten Gillibrand view of, ooh, I mean, it was not on topic, but, Kirsten Gillibrand talking about Zohran, I've got constituents upset about you. Different context, but the same thing of the Democrats concerned. Well, no, people are concerned about, the trolling that they do. Whereas he stood up, and on that, it's like, wow, that's a good thing. And so I was on the commission, and the commission was mixed. We had Republicans on there, we had different types, but I did the section, that recommendation section, and talked about how much it's harmful to local communities, because what happens is, uh, you have your local police, they arrest somebody, they bring them in, they book them, they let them go. If they are, ICE can find that information if they want to. Nobody block. This is the myth that they
Yeah,
give. Nobody's
yeah.
blocking ICE from doing whatever they want. But, not whatever they want, but they are, they're not governed. The state can't arrest an ICE officer, for performing a duty. That's a different thing. But it's the cooperation. And when you cooperate, the police departments don't want to do that, because they don't want somebody who is raped, beaten, to be afraid to call them just because they're an immigrant. Because guess, not only is that super inhumane, it is also practically minded stupid, because then people know that they can commit crimes and rob and steal and do anything to people who are based on status, which is incredible and police don't want anything to do with him. And my cousin was a cop in Pennsylvania. He said, I don't want to deal with this. I don't know what I'm doing. But they want that. And so then there's a couple places here they've deputized them. The same reason that Maryland doesn't detain
Yeah,
people.
to be able to ask them about their status, to be able to hold them until ICE agents pick them up, you know? And that's the thing, is holding them, you know?
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. And so every president has wanted this, including, you know, Obama. Every president has wanted it because ICE is under their control, and they want more federal control. This is a different level, but again, nobody said, "Oh, I respect local communities for all of this," which would have been the humane thing to do, and that includes every president, every one of them, from Bush on through Trump. But Trump is now threatening, and it's a different level. And so I know in Baltimore they're resisting him. The mayor of Baltimore has said, come and get me," and Homan is, "I'm going to arrest them," and all of these things. So in Florida, uh, it's a state law that they have to do this, right?
yeah. Yeah, so I think you mentioned it, 287G, the program. The program is that they have to um, help the ICE agents do the ICE agents' duties for them, you know? And this week, another uh, news that's coming out is that we are bringing 200 Marines down here to also help us with these ICE immigration duties.
And so, did we know what they're going to do? Like,
Uh,
what is?
Probably help put more people in our a great alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, we always think about, okay, I, I'm a Marine. I joined to be a Marine for whatever reason, and you're now under ICE, and you are trained to be a Marine, and you are now doing administrative immigration work, because it's administrative. They find somebody, like, and uh it's we saw it happen in Texas when they did the same, when they sent the National Guard, when Governor Abbott sent the National Guard there, and they stood around. They don't know what they were doing. That's not what they had them, making wire fences a little bit. Okay, it's not even really an engineering feat. And so I think, I don't know. I mean, it's really new when you say, are people talking about it? Who knows? Because so much is missing. But I mean, what do you think? How do you think people are going to respond to that?
Again, this just came down yesterday, so we don't think this is what our Marines should be doing, you know? But this is what they want to, again, for the PR and the marketing, I think, of the facility that's opening up here, is yeah, let's just send 200 Marines down there. Let's do this.
So
Just like they sent the National Guard to California.
I want to pivot to something I know you're concerned that caught you in the news this week. And again, this is just one thing, that you pointed out as we were talking before we went on about you know, what's going on now is, clearly when you used to go, I remember I used to go to my ICE office, where people would, ask, whatever they're reporting, whatever, but in the office, they would have the picture of, some drug kingpin being arrested by the DEA and all that, and being taken off a plane and back to their country to face justice because they probably are responsible for many, many crimes and deaths and all that in their country. And they would say, these are our people. And this is the way when Trump ran that he was doing it on. And so we don't have to get it. We know the statistics we see in the videos. Thank God for TikTok all over the world and all these, quick videos, reels, whatever people put up, where we see what's going on in immigration courts. That's a separate topic, but we see who's really being arrested, and they're saying, okay, well, they broke the immigration law. They crossed the border illegally. They didn't have any status, so that's just as bad. Breaking laws is the same thing. So now they just equated them. Who cares if they're a drug kingpin or them? Now you're saying they're doing their PR. So, but first Trump wasn't going into red states and all that, but then he's kind of poked the bear and gone into some ag fields and meat pack. He went into a meat packing plant in Nebraska, and the ICE guys had people on their cars. And I remember years ago when they tried to do a farm. It wasn't his administration, but they tried to go into a farm in Nebraska or somewhere like that, and the owners were there with shotguns on them, just like the land rights people we saw before. So, how did what happened there with Trump this
So
week?
yeah, when he came to visit our great facility, he came and he spoke about owner responsibility, like giving those undocumented farm workers and hotel workers an exception as long as the person employing them is somehow responsible for them. So,
How do
I
you
mean,
view that? What's your view of that?
right? So
What do you
everyone
analogize
else
that?
is saying slavery, but what I'm saying is this is kind of what's going on in Jordan and Dubai and Qatar. This happens in countries that don't care about human rights laws too much. So we have these systems where someone who is not from Jordan and doesn't have a visa to be in Jordan and clearly is not there to tour, someone who is there to work only, can come in under either in business or either sponsorship of a family for them to be responsible for them. So usually, just one second here.
Sure.
Usually it would be somebody from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh, from India, coming in to work for a family and be a housekeeper or a nanny or a driver. And they cannot leave without the family's permission. They cannot go out without the family's permission. The family would hold their passports for them. It's modern day slavery, really. Okay,
Oh,
that's what it is. And he wants to bring it here to the US.
yeah, and this is something that is, you say, okay, it's what's happening around the world. And we know one thing we know about Trump is when it comes to world leaders that he really admires and respects, it ain't the Europeans who are fumbling around to try to keep some sort of social democracy. It sure as hell ain't the left of France that won last year. And we know it isn't Macron who's trying to more a little conservative trying to do that. It's not those folks. It's not people who deal with the messy democracy. It is the authoritarian folks and the ones that are the middle. I mean, this is a guy who went to the Middle East and didn't care about Israel, but he was more hanging out with them and their new toy. He likes that. And so he's influenced by that. And so that's certainly, you know, what influences him. But he has also the weight of our own history has, when we ended our own formal slavery in the United States, people lived on, there were quote unquote tenant farmers, meaning, okay, you're not a slave. You're still, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to work on the farm and you're quote free, but you're not really free because the housing, you get this housing, but there's no market pricing, so they can market as they want and they take it out of your wages and you owe them to continue to work and they keep you in debt as, and so this is something that was done in a lot of labor towns, and this was the birth of unions, which at that time were Eastern European immigrants mostly who, and people in the United States who were people who were born and raised here, but they united to form unions in order to do these worker protections in the United States. And so, we'll talk about its Secretary of Labor was pulled into this. It has an Office of Immigration Policy. So this is, these are all nascent things. So I think I don't like to talk in speculation because we don't know. This is how you analogize it, which is an interesting way to analogize it, which is great. But I think the shows where people talk about, well, this means this, we don't know where it's going to go. I mean, we flag these, and sadly, back in April, I called some of the things that I saw happening on use of the Alien Enemies Act have been come true. And so I think this is something that is with the pandemic, and one of the things that came out of it was, you had Smalls in New York organizing against Amazon. You have people fighting for workers' rights right now in the United States that's come on in like this gig economy and a very, workers are very vulnerable. And one of the things about Trump, besides just being a Republican on labor, he himself has a very, very storied history of treating labor horribly, treating everybody horribly, contractors too, people he's done business with, but treating labor. What was that? Yeah.
Exploiting, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's the
wants
king.
to bring back these child labor is okay, and exploiting this, and he's taken away the funding for us to fight that overseas as well.
Yes. And so these all connect. These all connect, and the foreign policy connects with what happens here. And as these rights are eroding, and I say that in a way that eh, there's a big part of that. I think this is the last vestige. The next generation isn't going to tolerate it. And whether this goes through or not, who knows? And whether how long it could stand, who knows? But I think that is, something to flag. So hi, I know we've been going a while. You're going to come back. We're going to talk about so much more. We've got so much to cover, but I want to just connect, the world all connects, right? And we know our couple shows ago, we had on crossing fingers and toes, future Congressman Mo Goldman from Arizona 6th. And I knew that I knew you had studied in Arizona. I didn't know any connection to Arizona. I know you've lived all over in parts of the US and the world and all of this, but I didn't know you. Okay, you went to college in Arizona, you moved back to Jacksonville. But you said, "Oh yeah, I know his sister and his mom." So because I talked some about Gloria. So tell me about that connection.
She's amazing. She's amazing. Yeah, so I went to school at Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law with Larissa Mo's sister.
Is that
And
University of Arizona, right?
yeah,
Yes. And
Arizona State,
okay. Oh, so
not University of Arizona in Tucson.
so you
No,
were in Phoenix. You were in
I was in
Tempe.
Phoenix.
Tempe,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay, yeah.
yeah, but I would drive to Tucson to attend Gloria's hearings.
Wow.
So, yeah,
And
and she
so,
would allow us to do it. She's an amazing, amazing immigration attorney.
there's an in-person.
Really, her individual hearings was, my gateway as a law school student to come into and have the grounding to be in immigration law. So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's really, and I swear I did not know that. And it's just a it's a it yeah, it's an incredible thing. And I think like what we learned from Mo, and you're talking here, and uh and Florida still has that. We are one Florida. It's just, when the maybe when things get so bad, who knows when, the next hurricane comes and you're not getting any help from anywhere, and you got, folks coming down there, and ICE starts arresting them off of rebuilding things. Who knows? The establishment in different industries. Who knows? We are it's not just people who are used to fighting for rights and looking at it that way, but I think that the general population, once the noise is taken away, nobody wants to be an asshole. Nobody
Yeah,
wants to be no, nobody wants, it's always like their person. Nobody wants to be that. And I think that this is what's happening. And you see evangelicals in the South building their churches through immigrants because, they view that as important in their lives, and they view, these things. And so this is why, the things we were taught, and and it's not, these are people walking in a minority. They got in because we sleptwalked and did bad strategy because we didn't protect rights of immigrants. Uh, f- we didn't protect rights of people uh, defending, Palestinian rights, uh, human rights, uh, and but
but you
certainly,
see the change coming, right? Like
oh,
with
Zohran,
Zohran Mamdani,
yeah.
being elected, like that completely blows the administration's mind. But in reality, the people on the ground want change.
Well, that's right. And people think, okay, New York City is, whatever they think of it. I remember, when Mike Pence going to New York and he ran the Chili's, I mean, that was his, again, showing where they, like this is some strange place, or they like certain parts in it. But New York, I mean, other than maybe de Blasio being pretty left, I mean, they elected Eric Adams. They had 16 years of Michael Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani. And so they are not a place where this is not if Zohran Mamdani were elected in Berkeley, California, or even Boston, or somewhere like that, you say, okay, all right, well, that's some really liberal city, but this isn't that. And he got a huge majority. Now, a majority with 8 people running, he's the majority once they've gone through ranked choice voting, because people don't care. People don't view him as a Muslim. No matter how much people say that, people don't care about like old ideology that was Cold War divisions. And yeah, you may have escaped a place that, had an ideology but was repressive against you and your family. Like truly, that may have happened, or jailed you. But that doesn't mean that, it's an attack on social services. It's an attack on wanting good things. It's an attack on serving people, and it's an attack on
His
diversity more than,
policies are for New York.
yeah.
There are for New Yorkers, good for New York, and that's what the New Yorkers who are voting see. They see his policies, not just foreign policies, you know. And we've mentioned this before, but in that debate, when they asked him, what's the first thing you're going to do? What's the first city you're going to visit? He's like, I'm staying right here in New York. When
Yeah.
everybody, well, most of the other candidates running said, we're going to Israel, we're going to Israel, we're going to Israel.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, there's hope with him, and there's hope within like um the fact that so much of what they're doing, like this jail in Florida, I'm sorry, nobody views it. I mean, I think very few people view it as an event. It's getting sort of old, and people are just, I think the weight of uh the weight of these attacks on people is looking old, and the weight of punishing people and detaining them like that. People don't, you know, I don't think people
We
want to
don't want
live
to
in
be
a police
associated
state.
with that. We don't want to be associated with that.
No,
You
and I
know,
don't think people want to
it's
be in a
heartbreaking.
police state. I mean, I don't think most people want to be in a police state. I don't think, and it'll be interesting if they start raiding the evangelical churches in Alabama, where I have I mean, a lot of my clients have moved down. And I remember I had clients that are like, oh, there's good jobs in Mississippi. I'm like, well, okay, this is where you're gonna, local police and all that, but there are communities that down in Mississippi, Arkansas, where there's work to be done, and so people go where there's jobs, and it's also, wow, it's cheap. Like I can buy a, something, or I can, I mean, my friend that was my friend, my client that's not, lives in rural Maryland, um, you know, he's got a second house because they buy something as a shell and build it, and for themselves. And it's like, this is what, and we know that immigrants will live anywhere. It's not like, so it's we say the demographics have changed, but people do need to say, this is what I want. And that's the empowerment, that I hope people get, you know from listening here. And if people want to have discussion, debate, all open for it, but we got to have a discussion that is not clouded by, you know hysteria. Like, people, like, take it down. It's going to get bad because this is how they can ratchet things up. But you've also got to say, hey, what kind of community I'm doing. So, actually, at the end of the month, I'm going to go to see a friend in Ohio who lives near Springfield, and we're going to do a show from there, Springfield, Ohio, which was big during the debate. And I hope to have somebody, speak from what it means, because one of the other issues, and we'll talk about this also in the context of Arizona, where the Tona Odom. I don't pronounce it well, but they're in Tucson. It's a huge tribe, but they are half in the U.S. and some over the border. So Customs and Border Protection is in their reservation, and they have had issues with that. But this one is right in the shadow of both the Miccosukee and the Seminole Reservation. So people who were on native reservations are in this is in their shadow, in their neighborhood, just over their border. And not to mention, it's near not far from the Everglades Visitor Center. The tourist, it's to show it off. And it's a matter of, like, um, it really is in people's sort of backyard, but it's a matter of whether those people, you know, count, that live there and have their voices heard. So, anyway, that's good for today. And so this is, Haya, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me, Mark. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yes.
And you're going to give us some updates as Florida moves forward.
Of course.
And also as we see people, because they do have an election next year. DeSantis is termed out, right? I think he's termed out. So next year, so we'll see. You know, God knows. I know the Democratic Party in Florida. God knows what, their agenda is going to be, other than, he's been divisive, and, like, his extremism is bad, but whether there's going to be a positive agenda, hopefully we'll see,
Maybe we'll get a progressive. We don't know.
well, somebody that cares about the community, somebody that cares about Florida. I mean, Bob Graham was the governor when I was around there, and I got to know him. He came to Florida and got to know him, and he cared. He cared about people in the state. He actually, and that's the thing. Florida is not what it is now, and Florida doesn't have some of the history other states do, and it doesn't need to be this way. Nowhere does. So, you know, anyway, thank you to Jeff Barsky again for providing music, and for Stephanie Buatois for producing. Until next time, thanks again, Haya, and we'll
Thank
talk
you.
soon.